Welcome to the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
And I'm Caitlin Drake. I use female pronouns she, her, hers.
Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. This is the second episode in our Christianity and Pop Culture series, where we will discuss how Christianity and pop culture intersects. Our guest for this series is Reverend Sara Pugh Montgomery. Welcome, Sarah.
Hey, y'all. Good to be here.
Okay, Sarah. So today's episode in this series, we're talking about Christianity and movies/television. So in this episode, we're going to talk through themes and events in 5 pieces. Well, depends on how you count, I guess. We're going to talk about Bruce Almighty. We're going to talk about the TV show The Good Place, Disney films Frozen and Frozen 2, and then the original Star Wars trilogy. So I don't know if you want to count that as 3 or 1, but so for our listeners, if you've been planning to watch any of these, but you haven't yet, you probably want to pause this podcast and go watch them now before coming back, because we will have some spoilers. So quick background on this series. We started looking at Christianity and pop culture because a lot of times people treat those things as very separate concepts, but they're often very deeply intertwined. So we talked a bunch about some of this theology in our first episode. So I encourage our listeners to go check that out if you're interested in more of the theology. But I'm interested, Sarah, really quick, why did you agree to do this series with us? What appeals to you about this discussion?
Yeah, well, I think, first I want to continue to maintain my coolness. And so I thought being able to be a part of a podcast that talks about pop culture shows that I am in. But no, really, I wanted to, I think there's so many times that, as a preacher, where when I'm reading a biblical text or thinking about a theological concept, that I'll often remember something from a movie or from a book or from a piece of music. And so being able to lift those up and to show that these are helpful tools instead of being something that we need to reject. So I think it's a great way to be able to have, to remind folks that those things can intersect and in healthy ways. And I really loved the idea of having this conversation, while folks are sheltering at home. And so, I remember that before I had kids, when there was a blizzard at the place that I was living in Virginia, we had 2 feet of snow, and I was able to watch the whole series of Lost, during the time that I was, in my house, stuck literally in my house. And so I thought just really being able to give then some information and some kind of thoughts for folks to be able to build upon, and then they can go back and, watch that show or reread that book and be like, oh yeah. And that way we can have some flow of conversation as well as a congregation. So I just love the idea of being able to have it during this particular time in our life as well.
So TV and the Bible seem like very different things, but do you have a way of finding a similarity between them? Can you tell us about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think of the Bible is, it's a bunch of stories. So it's literature that is, a lot of there's different levels of literature within that. So you have historical and, parables and poetry and all these different places. But the Bible is overall telling us a story. And in a lot of ways, that's what TV and movies are doing, is they're telling us a story and inviting us into that narrative. And so often those narratives that we find within the biblical world are able to be able to kind of creatively be expounded upon in different ways through art and through film or through music and in today through TV and movies. And so being able to take some of those narrative tracks and to create something that allows us to kind of play with it. And so, it's just storytelling is storytelling. So storytelling is a part of our scripture. It's a part of our Bible. We see that as spiritual storytelling. And so, but there's this wonderful thing that the United Church of Christ says, which is that God is still speaking. So there's this idea then that, God has not stopped revealing God's self to us. And so that, these movies and these television shows and these books can be a part of God continuing to speak to us just in different ways.
So when we first started talking specifically about movies, but also just when we were exploring the series, we were trying to find kind of themes or chunks or groupings of pieces. And so when we were looking at movies and TV, we were trying to figure out, do we talk about TV together or movies together? But then we realized that there are really two different types of movies, TV shows, in how they relate to this conversation. So there are those that are really explicit about religion and religious themes. So some films and TV that would fit that in this conversation are Bruce Almighty and The Good Place. But more broadly, things like Dogma, the new TV show Lucifer. So they take those ideas about God and heaven and hell and make them central elements of their plot. And then the other kind that we'll talk about are those movies or TV shows that have religious allegories or themes or parallels, but aren't as explicit in incorporating those religious concepts. So Sarah, when we first pitched this series to you, you had wanted to talk about Dogma, but then we realized that that was not available for streaming, much to all of our disappointment.
Indeed.
So we went with the runner-up, Bruce Almighty. And this movie, fun fact, was banned in Egypt. When it came out, they said that the comedy infringes on God's sacredness. So you know that this is going to be an interesting conversation. So Sarah, can you just give us a brief overview of the plot of this film, since it is a little older? It's from 2003.
Yes, and that hurts my heart that we say that that's older, because that's when I graduated college. But one of the cool things that I actually found out about Bruce Almighty is that it's within a category called American Religious Comedy, which I had no clue there was actually a realm of film that was categorized as American religious comedy. But so Bruce Almighty is set up as really one of those great plots around challenging God and being able to asking the questions about what happened, why do good things happen to bad people, and why do good things happen, bad things happen to good people. And so, this guy, Bruce, he's a news reporter and he wants to be able to get the main gig at the station, but he doesn't get it. His competitor gets it. And so Bruce gets mad. And he gets really mad at God and kind of tells God, like, I could be in charge of this place. Like, I should have won this gig. And so God kind of calls him out on that and brings him in and kind of says, okay, you think you can do it? Let's see you do it. Let's see if you can handle it. And so you then have this interplay of the whole time, though, that while Bruce is trying to play God, he is not allowed to change or alter anybody's free will, which is a really interesting part in terms of a film being able to play with that image of who God is, and bringing in that aspect. And so throughout the film, Bruce is challenged about being able to understand kind of what it's like to be God and how that plays, that all of these prayers are being sent to him, and so he just responds kind of in this system with an automatic reply of yes to everybody. And so that causes chaos, that everybody gets whatever they want. And so because everybody was praying to win the lottery. And so when everybody won the lottery, they only got $10, because everybody had won the lottery. And so God, this really great interchange around kind of what does it mean to, what does prayer mean? What does that look like? And what does it look like to really be able to have these powers and to play with this without there being anything that you can control somebody else around. And so, and it ends in a very sweet way and a great redemption story at the end.
Something that resonated with me, and probably with a lot of folks, is that Bruce starts out really angry at God. And sometimes when things are really hard or overwhelming or exhausting, it's human nature to ask, why is this happening? Why? I feel like there are some biblical examples of the same thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. There's one of my favorite books is the book of Job. And so, this whole character of Bruce in a lot of ways can be kind of surrounding this idea and this image of Job and challenging God then at the end, and God kind of coming at the end and was like, were you there to be able to, that we're a part of creation from the very beginning. And so, but the whole book of Job is that struggle with this theological concept that we call theodicy, which is that question of, why do bad things happen to good people? And so you have, that arc that's throughout the whole book of Job. But then this whole idea of being angry at God, there are times with Abraham as well, where Abraham was, angry at God for not doing things in a certain way, and tried to bargain with God to get things to shift and change. And, and so was Moses, and, and people have, we even have Jesus being able to, maybe some folks might not want to call it anger. It all depends on how you see Jesus being, but, this whole idea of just not wanting to follow through with what Jesus is being asked to do. And he kind of is like, why me, God? Like, why do I have to do this? And so that, even the one that we worship as Messiah is, has been angry and has been able to cry out in that realm of anger towards God, and that's holy, and that's completely sacred and biblical. And it's, it's a part of who we are as human nature. And, as my campus minister always reminded me, God can handle our anger. And so it's okay to be angry at God. And so I love that there's this film that really allows us to imagine that anger with God in a productive and a powerful way, instead of just something where we have to push it down.
One of the things that you mentioned when you were talking about, giving the synopsis of this film, is you talked about prayer, and how Bruce responds when he has God's power to prayer. And that just has me thinking a little bit about kind of different understandings of prayer. So there is one kind of thinking or approach to prayer where it's like God's a cosmic vending machine. Mm-hmm. And what I put out there to God, I just want God to give to me. What is maybe a different way or a better way, a bigger way maybe of looking at prayer? Because we know that the cosmic vending machine thing, I haven't won the lottery lately, so it's not working for me, at least.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really think of prayer more as a conversation with God. And so within prayer, I'm going to, have that conversation piece where I am going to be able to vocalize those emotions. So whether it's anger, whether it's fear, whether it's joy, whether it is a want, and kind of saying, I would really want this to happen, that we can say those things and have those conversation pieces within prayer. I think what's the trick part is how we are feeling about what should happen on the other side of prayer. So does it mean then that if I have voiced that to God, that then that has to happen, or that is what's going to be the response? And so, we think a lot about how prayer has a couple of different responses, which is yes, no, or not right now. And so, and a lot of times that not right now is the one that I don't like the most, because it's the one that I'm like, well, no, I wanted it now. And so don't tell me to wait for this. But this whole idea of God's timing versus our timing. And so prayer can still be that space where we, ask for those things that are on our hearts. But that doesn't mean that God's going to vend them back out to us in every single response as a yes. And so it does allow us to be able to explore those different concepts and ideas of prayer.
What does this film illustrate around some of our misunderstandings of God's power and how we grapple with that?
I loved kind of the creativity and the humor that they had with Bruce being able to have these powers and not being able to control folks, though. And there was even this great quote towards the end where, he's trying to make his girlfriend love him again because some other things had happened within the movie. And Bruce says, well, how do I make her love me? And and God kind of just says, well, that's the question I've always wondered too. How do I make people love me? And so, there's this wonderful idea then about God as almighty and omnipotent and all knowing, and has this file cabinet that extends out and out and out and out and out about all the different things that we've done. So it knows all those things, but can't make us do certain things. And so it really has this great interchange and interplay, around this concept of free will and what that really means for humans. And so that there is this knowledge of that, God is way more powerful than all of us, but is not a puppeteer, and so is not controlling everything we do. So we get to be a part of inviting ourselves into that. And so, just like we were talking about in our last podcast, Dante really explored that idea around free will a lot as well, within his work. And so it is a big thing that comes up, and a big struggle for folks to think about God being all powerful, and what does that mean for us in terms of having free will. So I think it's great that there's a film that is able to explore that within some comedy, and that way it's not, as hard to process or to think through.
Something else that I love about this film is that Morgan Freeman plays God. And so now I always picture Morgan Freeman, and I'm picturing God. So that's not a question. That's just a personal proclamation about this movie.
I know, it's great. And then whenever I think of Morgan Freeman, the movie I always go to is Shawshank Redemption. So then I think of God as like this character within the prison system as well. So I think it's just this great way of connecting different films together too.
So like Bruce Almighty, The Good Place really has prominent themes of heaven and hell and God and Satan and kind of those pieces that we grapple with, as well as a lot around ethics and morality. And they're really not shy about the ethics piece. The producers actually employed 2 philosophical advisors for the show, who apparently appear in the season finale. So you actually see them on screen. I just read that while I was researching this, and I have not seen the 4th season. So now I just have one more thing to look forward to. Can't wait till it's streaming. So Sarah, just kind of a brief summary. I think particularly the 1st season of this show, kind of what's going on there?
Yeah, and this is going to be a total spoiler alert. So if you have not seen it, now is the time to end this podcast, because once you know the end of season 1, you cannot watch season 1 with the same eyes. So in season 1, we are introduced to a bunch of characters that have died, and that we all believe have gone to heaven, and that they believed that they've gone to heaven, or to the good place, as it's called. And so we're, they are paired up and kind of been able to be a part of, matched up with their soulmates. And so they kind of live out through these different times of life. And then towards the end, we find out that this whole, that they're actually in hell, and they're actually in the bad place, because they are not the, within their time on earth, they have not exactly been the best people in the world, so to speak. And so in some ways, part of their time of being in the good place is grappling with, like, are we sure that I'm in the right spot? And, and kind of this whole question and quandary around that. But it's also this then, kind of after you find that big reveal sort of towards the end of season 1, it's also then looking at the fact of that what the folks were doing within the bad place at this time was actually torturing them and thinking that they were within the good place. And so you have this whole idea then of what does heaven and hell actually mean, and what is our part and participation within that, and can we become good people? And can we quote, they have a scoring system. So are we being scored in order to be able to earn this spot within heaven? So there's a lot of really interesting pieces that come in and play into this great series.
So let's dig into some of those pieces. So one, the idea that they're being punished, even they're in the quote unquote good place, but it's actually a bad place designed around kind of their failures on earth. And so Eleanor, who is kind of the protagonist, who spent her entire time on earth lying, is put in then a position where she knows she's not supposed to be in the good place. And so she's lying to stay there. And so her crime, quote unquote, on earth, her sins on earth are kind of following her. And I think that's interesting, kind of related to our last podcast when we talked about Dante, this idea that the punishment fits the crime. What does the Bible say about hell and the afterlife?
Yeah, just like we talked about last time. I mean, this is where shows like this and, pieces like Dante's Inferno just get really super creative, because Bible doesn't say much. And so it's not really all that descriptive. I mean, there is conversation between two forces. So again, if we go back to thinking about Job, you have God and Satan sort of meeting up at the beginning of Job and sort of having a conversation and trying to figure out who they're going to mess with, basically. And so, but there's no real, other than knowing that hell is the space where, where that is this other space. There's not really a big description of it. And there's not a big description of what that means or looks like, other than that it's the absence of God. And so that, hell is a space where God is absent. And so then heaven, then on the opposite side of that, then would be that's a space where you are eternally with God. And you're eternally, within God's presence. And so, so again, scripture, it's actually interesting because, Jewish faith, the resurrection and the afterlife is, when you're dead, and nothing's really happening after you're dead. Like you're put into the ground and that's where you are. And so their idea of the afterlife comes with the coming back of the Messiah. So with the return of Messiah. And so as Christians, when, this is where the resurrection was that complete kind of pivotal shift, and kind of talk about, film and art, the plot twist came with the resurrection. Like that's where everything shifted and changed, because then we could talk about that death wasn't the end, and that there was this idea of life after death. And so that part doesn't even come into play then until the book of Acts, or until, the end of each one of the Gospels, where folks are like, holy cow, there's this other piece out there. So that's why I love that there is actually film and books and, music that really explores these concepts, because there's, so much that we don't know. And so to be able to have an opportunity to explore that in some creative ways just allows us to be able to explore what that means to be in the presence of God, or in the complete absence of God.
The Good Place explores the idea of becoming a better person, of working towards fixing your wrongs and becoming a nicer, better person. What does Christianity say or teach about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the way that it is explored in The Good Place kind of goes a little bit against what Christianity would say, because in The Good Place, you're becoming a better person in order to earn a spot, or in order to earn grace, or to earn salvation. So there, may I say then that there are Christian theologies that would say that is a part of what happens within sort of what we do here on earth, that as we become better people, and as we live into that, then we are earning those spaces. But then there's another side of Christian faith that is calling us to be good people within the world, and calling us to be better. As Methodists, we talk about the different levels of grace. And so sanctifying grace is moving us on towards Christian perfection. So, we are kind of on this journey of becoming better people, but it's not in order to gain something, or to earn something, or to get a reward. It's to be able to share God's love, and for us to be more in connection with God. So it's a different kind of thing than what the good place was really, wrestling with, which was this idea of being able to earn your space. So if you were a good person, then you get to earn this space within the good place. But Methodism doesn't really jive with that. And so there are some that do, are some Christian understandings that do kind of would align with that, but not Methodism. We kind of look towards that God is, that you cannot earn God's love. And so that grace is something that is given to you as a gift.
And in later seasons of The Good Place, they start to get more complicated.
Oh, yeah.
So you talked about the point system, and I think that's probably one of the funniest parts in the first season, is when you see how they apply points, and they'll have like weird little like running counters. And so it's like, for every sandwich you ate, you get 3 points. If you end slavery, you get 500,000 points.
That's right.
So it turns out, Abraham Lincoln doing pretty well. The rest of us, not so much. Go to a Red Hot Chili Peppers concert, you lose points. Like it's hilarious. And this idea then that things have a moral impact, that every choice you make has value, gives value to the world or takes away value. Which I think is a really interesting concept that maybe, I don't know if there's a biblical component to that or not, in terms of, how each of our choices might impact the rest of the world.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the really cool parts of the arc and the storyline that I love of how they play with, is thinking about more than just what you do impacting you, is that you have this whole kind of understanding of all the different ripples that go across that. And so there's not necessarily anything that directly correlates with that, except we can always think about, one of the really interesting parts of David's storyline, with King David, is that when he sinned and had an affair with Bathsheba, that it wasn't King David that was the one who, was then stripped of his crown and not allowed to do anything anymore. It was the offspring of that affair that was killed, that died, and I've always kind of really hated that part because I'm like, hold on, that doesn't make sense. But because like David should be the one that has to face the consequences. But I think that there is then this, within the question that you were asking, and what the Good Place kind of plays along with, is that what we do impacts more than just us. And that, that storyline with King David really helps bring that into a different perspective in a new way. And so the way that they were grappling and kind of wrestling with that, I always loved it, and it's part of that whole ethical quandary of, when we are within the world, we just had Earth Day the other day. And so everything that I do can impact the earth in a negative way. And so it's, kind of having to be able to think about, okay, what are the things that I can control, and what are the things that I'm being called to do? But then also, what are the things that I can personally make changes to, because I know now that they are impacting people in different ways, and that they're against these other different systems. So, we're not going to be able to change everything, because we are also a part of bigger systems than just ourselves. But I loved that idea that of that reminder that everything that we do has an impact other than just us. And that really does pull that into that it's more than just about you or me as individuals. It's about community together.
And I can't remember if it was the second or the third season where they started to get into some of the nitty gritty of, it's a good thing if you buy your friend a flower, it's an act of kindness. But then if that flower comes from a farm that uses pesticides and isn't ethically sourced, and right. And so then it's not as clear cut, that good and bad are not easy to navigate, and our own choices aren't always easy to navigate despite our best intentions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that'll, when we start talking about Star Wars, that whole idea of good and bad and sort of, those things being innately positive or negative are also really challenged during that whole trilogy as well. Or as you might call it, the nineagy. I don't even know what the word is when there's 9 things, but the series, the 3 trilogies. But that whole concept is really of, is there a good and a bad, and that they're just there, or are these things a lot more messy, which is what I love about The Good Place, is it really introduces us to the mess that is a part of all of that, rather than that there's this category and this category.
Yeah, I love it when shows or plays or movies really work on the world is not black and white. It's not one way or another. There's a lot of gray area in the middle as well. So this is another one of those. We're going to move quickly to a couple of movies that I'm not sure if you have seen, Sarah. It is the small indie company, I believe, that made Frozen and Frozen 2. Have you seen those movies?
Only about 5 million times. So, and seeing might be different than have I heard them through my minivan in the back seats. But yes, I have seen these films and I love them.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I also have seen a few times and they're quite enjoyable. But while Frozen saw amazing commercial success, there were a small minority of Christians who criticized the film. Some of the criticism was that the magic Elsa displayed encouraged witchcraft. I want to know what your thoughts are around that and which camp you're in with that.
So I actually was one of those people that until about 2 hours ago when y'all told me about this, I had no clue that there was that kind of upheaval about Frozen. So yeah, I don't have any problems with Frozen or with the witchcraft. I actually love Frozen. Is, I think, a wonderful film because it's part of what Disney has done with their later princess films in terms of reframing that princess storyline. So I was raised on a different storyline of what a princess means. And then this has really shifted. It shifted a lot with The Princess and the Frog and Moana and Frozen and, Brave. And, so all these princesses have now really changed in a lot of ways. And, and so I had no clue. I thought that was the struggle of Frozen. I had no idea that there were folks who were against it because of the witchcraft. So I didn't even know about that. So nope, not in that camp.
Not only do they change the narrative around it, but they kind of mock the old narrative with everybody being shocked about the way they're behaving. So they mock their old narrative to have their new one as well.
One of the themes in Frozen and also in the Bible is around forgiveness, both in Frozen and I think to some extent in Frozen 2. Do you want to dig into that a little bit, Sarah?
Yeah, I think there is a great theme, around forgiveness and in many different realms. So, you have forgiveness among the two, among the two sisters, and this kind of, forgiveness that happens towards the end, that even though Anna has been, rejected over and over and over again by her sister Elsa, she still unconditionally loves her. And so this idea of what forgiveness looks like, even when you've kind of been pushed to the side, and how that plays out. And then in Frozen 2, I see a lot of forgiveness kind of with being able to, with their parents. So there's, you have one kind of storyline in Frozen about the system and the way that their parents parented and how they were told that they died, and all of that changes in Frozen 2 in terms of understanding in a new way kind of what happens with their parents. And so then there's this struggle of forgiveness that comes back up again then, and of blaming self. Elsa blames herself for her parents' death because her parents were trying to search and to find out more about who Elsa really is. And then there's again the forgiveness between the two sisters then, because Elsa wants to go off and do things on her own, and that makes both Olaf and Anna really angry at her. And so I think it's great to be able to show that forgiveness is not just this easy thing that happens and it's a one-time gig and then you're done with it, but instead it's something that kind of continues over and over again. And and that always reminds me of what Jesus says and reminds us about, that we're going to have to forgive folks, over and over, that kind of, 70 times 7 sort of piece. And so, that might mean that I want to calculate that out and kind of be like, okay, I've now done it, 490 times. And so I'm good. But that reminder that forgiveness is a part of love, and it's a part of relationship and a part of being together. And it doesn't mean that, that everything has to end. But it just means that that's a part of our process and a part of our cycle of being community and of being a loving community together.
Sacrifice is also an important attribute in the Bible and in Christianity. How does sacrifice enter into these stories of Frozen and Frozen 2?
So this is where I feel like that, the first time I watched Frozen, I was floored at the end that the sacrifice came, that Disney really took a narrative and was able to turn it so much that the sacrifice wasn't about the love relationship, the romantic love relationship between, a princess and the soon-to-be prince, but instead was among siblings. And that this sacrificial love that really comes with loving your siblings so much, and that familial love, which I think kind of comes back. We talked last time about Lewis, so C.S. Lewis wrote about the 4 loves. And so that there's then this idea of this sacrifice being able to be a part of not just this one idea of what sacrifice looks like. But I loved the concept of that, of being able to love your siblings so much that you would do whatever you could to be able to save that sibling and to be able to save that person that you love, within that moment. And, and then seeing that again in Frozen 2, of the knowledge that the sacrifice that has to happen in order to be able to right what was wrong, what had been wronged within the history, was the sacrifice of potentially having the whole city destroyed, and in order to be able to bring unity back again. And so just this idea of sacrifice being a part again of our journey, and it's a part towards that idea of forgiveness again that we just talked about, but it's also a part towards reconciliation and to renewal.
And just as somebody who is, I'm one of three girls, so I have 2 sisters. There aren't a lot of Disney movies, or even movies in general, that really highlight a strong sibling bond. So often, if there are siblings, they're rivals. One is good and one is bad. So I think there is a lot of power in that, highlighting that different kind of relationship. And I think when you bring in that biblical tie of, loving someone as your brother, as your neighbor, it does highlight a different understanding of love that we don't often see emerge in film, because there's so much focus on the romance.
Absolutely.
Another piece of Frozen, particularly Frozen 2, you wrote a great devotional for our daily devotionals recently using Frozen 2, because you've seen it a bajillion times, with Ruth, about change. And, that is so much a central theme in this film, how we deal with and how we manage change. How does that connect to our faith lives?
There's, so the great part of Frozen 2, I think, is that it kind of plays with this idea of change in a really comedic way. And so kind of as they're singing the song about some things never change, everything around them is changing. So they talk about a stone wall that will never fall. And as Olaf jumps off of the stone wall, pieces fall. And so just this idea of really playing with what is constant, even in the midst of change. There's this great line that Olaf says, sort of as the whole city has been, all the people have to go up onto the hill in order to escape. And, the kids are playing with him. And he said, this is controlling what you can control when you can't control everything right now. And so, being able to have that sort of idea that change is not something that we can completely control, And so what are the things that we can control? What are the ways that we can respond to that? And so I love how Frozen 2, invites that idea of change into a child's life as not something that's, again, it's not good or bad. It's just there. And so how can we be a part of that? And how does, in particular, how does love kind of help us get through that? How does community and relationship help us be able to navigate those waters of change together?
In Frozen 2, Kristoff says, "My love is not fragile." That line resonated with me along the line of God's love. Could you expound upon that?
Yeah, Kristoff is such a great character in Frozen 2, and such a, again, a phenomenal plot twist that Disney does with the male figure. And I think that there's this wonderful then idea about being able to show again, this love that is consistent and is constant. It's he has this hilarious 90s ballad that really talks about even the fragility of that love for himself because of questioning that, but then no, it's still strong. It's still going to be a part of his connection to this other person. And so I just think that that's such a beautiful way of being able to show, that God's love is constant and consistent, and it's going to be strong even when we are not responsive in all the ways that God would like us to be able to be responsive. And so, Anna was not doing everything that Kristoff wanted, but he was like, I still love you. That's still going to be a consistent piece of who I am because of how you and I are in relationship together. And that was how she, so he was able to honor her just like God is a lot of times able to honor each of us within our responses to relationship, to that consistency of who God is and that love that God has for all of us.
It's so interesting. I wouldn't have thought about the kind of God lens. That line, "My love is not fragile." I loved it just from a feminist kind of lens. This one, the male character, acknowledging that relationships are messy and hard and confusing for them too. Disney doesn't do a lot of that. I grew up in the same era of damsel in distress Disney films. So I love that piece of Frozen, but I hadn't put that God lens on that element. Another theme that you get lit up about when we talk about Frozen, because we totally talk about Frozen all the time. But no, is grief, particularly within Frozen 2. And I think that's so important to talk about, especially right now, because we are in a kind of cultural period of grief as we're dealing with all of the layers that come from this pandemic and staying at home and the things that we're missing and the people that we're missing and the life events that we're missing. So can you talk a little bit about how this film touches on grief and what kind of faith lessons we can pull from that?
Absolutely. The song that is the best one to be able to talk about that grief lens is Anna's song, "The Next Right Thing." And there's just this beautiful image then of grief not being easy. It's not something that you just, it's not something that you're invited to push down or to just be like, okay, I got it. I've had to find joy within this. But, instead she cries through that song, and she openly grieves the loss of both Olaf and her sister, Elsa, thinking that Elsa has also died. And so this grief then of, well, what am I supposed to do now? Because everything has been now so overwhelming to her. She's all by herself. She's all alone. She's completely grief stricken. Two of the people that she loves the most are gone. And then this song comes up that talks about just doing the next right thing. And during this time of global pandemic, I think that's really important to be able to think about, okay, what's the next right thing that we're being called to do? Because grief can sometimes be so overwhelming that we want to try to fix all of the grief pieces all at once. But what Anna and what the song really invites us into is just to focus on that very next step. And so what does that next piece look like? So we don't have to completely fix our grief. We don't have to completely go through the cycles of grief in the way that they were lined out by Kubler-Ross. You know, we just need to be in the midst of that grief and allow the grief to be a part of that journey, knowing that the grief is going to be a part of doing that next right thing as well.
Now we're going to move from movies that are important to our culture now to another series of movies that have been in our culture since 1977 and have been huge since 1977. It's hard to get away from them because it feels like they're coming up with movies or TV shows yearly. And we're going to talk about Star Wars.
Yay!
And I was excited that this podcast is being released on May 4th, which is Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. And I want to start out with, throughout the Bible, there are stories of people rising, falling, and being redeemed. Would you be able to talk about the character arc of Anakin Skywalker throughout really the first 6 episodes, the original trilogy and the prequels?
Yeah, there's this, so if you kind of started as a kid, I only knew the original 3 first and then was introduced to the other, the prequels kind of after I'd been completely embedded in the original 3. And so having the prequels really gives this, wider view as to looking at Anakin's storyline in a different way and in a new and inviting way. And so, you kind of are able to see the beginnings of where Anakin begins and, how some of those pieces are a part of the narrative of and make his narrative challenging. And so, and then this whole idea and sense from the very beginning about that there's always been 2 forces that have been a part of who he is, and that they were sensing that the darker force was going to rise up. And so there was this idea then of what that would mean and what that would look like. And so you have then Anakin, rising then with the call towards that darker force, completely fell and transformed and changed into this different character than who he had been. So in the prequels, you have these 2 kind of storylines of Anakin as, father and husband, and then Anakin as, Jedi and what that looks like. And so you kind of have these 2 pieces where they're rolling up together, and then Anakin completely falls towards the end of that and continues to kind of be in decline as he's even seeking out his own son to be able to kill and to fight against. But then at the very end, that redemption comes. So there's always, what I love about the Anakin storyline is that, again, this knowledge that the good and evil are always a part, and we get to be a part of choosing. And so that even though Darth Vader, Anakin becomes Darth Vader. So even though Darth Vader is this kind of character that many of us would associate with evil, at the end, Darth Vader chooses the love of his son over the power that could have come from being able to kill his own son as well. And so you have this, redemption that comes at the very end of the original trilogy that really kind of brings him back into the storyline. And it's really interesting that the filmmakers then were able to bring the Anakin storyline back in and bring him back into the when they were redoing everything, to be able to bring him back in as a part of that redeemed group at the very end of their celebration at the end of episode, what is now episode 6.
Obi-Wan Kenobi says that the Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together. In the terms of Christianity, what does the Force represent?
To me, the Force really is a great representation of the Holy Spirit. And so this, idea of being able to have something that empowers and equips, that strengthens us and pulls us forward, that's able to call us towards living, in a different way within the world and being able to listen to something that's bigger than us. And I love the idea of, again, it might not have been how it was interpreted when they were writing the series, but I've always thought of the Force as the Holy Spirit that is continually calling us towards working for that good within the world.
May the Force be with you is a common saying throughout the movies by the Jedis. However, we know that the Force isn't always necessarily good, or isn't used in a good way, you might want to say instead, because it is used by Darth Vader on the dark side throughout the movies. How does this relate to Christianity in general?
Yeah, I mean, we always, again, that goes back to that, the Bruce Almighty theme of free will. I mean, we always have the choice to use this power that God has given us to be something that could be for good, or it could be something that could be for evil. And so, we could look back and see that, slavery, for instance, is something that, people were forcing others to be able to work for them. And for many years, Christians thought that was something that was a part of aligning with Scripture. But now we affirm that as something that was not a good use of power, or a good use of being able to be a part of community together. And we don't like to be able to use those scriptures to be able to affirm that now, which was what was used earlier. And so, there's these ways that human interactions and of power and control are able to see that that this sense of evil then, and this dark sense of the Force, are a part of what we're able to choose. And we can even look at, Pontius Pilate, and, Pontius Pilate had the ability to be able to release Jesus kind of within the narrative, but that power piece, he had free will to be able to decide what was going to happen. And so, could he have used that power for good, and to release Christ, or was he, using that power, or kind of living within that power in a more negative way?
This has been the Ascends, a Boston Avenue podcast. Our producer is Alicia Urban. Our theme music was composed and performed by Wyatt Smith. Boston Avenue United Methodist Church is a progressive historic church located in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please check out our social media for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.